From caves to condos, homes have always been, and always will be, a safe space for us humans to retreat. That said, not all houses are exactly fit for the purpose of providing that much-needed safety, security, and comfort. From ones that teeter at treacherous heights, to ones that are a little too close to sharks and volcanoes. Join me as we check out some of the riskiest houses in the world. The Tower of Terror. You've probably heard the saying, everything's bigger in the USA. But just across the sea from the States and Russia, you can find one particular house that's almost American in its proportions. A house, in fact, which was built too big for its own good. Let me explain. Our story begins in Russia, 1992. That year, businessman Nikolai Petrovich Suchikin began building his entirely wooden home in the city of Arkhangelsk. Being the city's richest man, Suchikin wanted to flaunt his wealth with an extravagant two-story house. But as it neared completion, he was left feeling dissatisfied. Something was missing. Another story, perhaps? So he added one, though that still didn't hit the spot. So he added another, and another, until eventually he found himself peering up at what can only be described as a half-finished, 144-foot, 13-story haunted mansion. Or rather, Suchikin House. But even after all that hard work in 1998, Suchikin found a new home. Prison. Suchikin's business practices, it turned out, weren't exactly squeaky clean, and landed him with racketeering charges culminating in a 4-year sentence. And his incomplete wooden skyscraper, with its top floors being little more than a hollow, unfinished shell, fell into disrepair and dilapidation. It wasn't long before neighbors began complaining that the inmate's vacant mansion was an environmental hazard. The lightest brush of a breeze would apparently cause the house to make ominous noises, and stronger gusts would shed planks of wood into neighboring yards. Things didn't get much better when the homeowner returned from prison and moved in. Unfortunately for Suchikin, the law stated that buildings beyond 2 stories required official permission from authorities, which he didn't have. With it being so tall and made of wood, it was also deemed a fire hazard, with authorities fearing that in the event of a fire, it would wipe out the rest of the neighborhood. With that, Suchikin was ordered to remove the upper floors, and he continued living in what remained until eventually he was ordered to fully demolish the rest of his not-so-humble abode in 2008. Truth is, Suchikin was probably safer back in his jail cell anyway, with the house said to quiver in the wind and shoddy workmanship evidenced by the fact that chunks of it were regularly falling off. It's not unfathomable to think it may have eventually collapsed altogether like a chocolate radiator, only with much more splinters. Living life on the edge. According to recent brain imaging research, living within a close proximity to water might just be what the doctor ordered. What with it being shown to stimulate the brain's feel-good chemicals such as dopamine and oxytocin. However, it also turns out that life by the tide might just be one of the riskiest places to be. It was June 2022 when the Yellowstone National Park region experienced unprecedented storms. A system of warm and wet air known as an atmospheric river unleashed on Yellowstone, and as you can see, resulted in devastating floods. In all its chaos, houses, roads, and bridges were destroyed, and certain areas had to be evacuated. After 3 days of weathering the storm, things were about to get a whole lot worse for local Montana couple TJ and Victoria Britton. Their home of 16 years sat right on the embankment of the Yellowstone River. In the midst of the storm, they began to notice their house was shaking. By the following morning, the river water had reached around 14 feet, and it was rapidly eating away at the embankment, rendering their home more and more unstable. For their safety, they were forced to evacuate and watch helplessly from afar until eventually, well, take a look for yourself.
Oh my gosh. There goes the house.
Yeah, just like that, TJ and Victoria's home of 16 years and lively possessions were swept down the river into the great beyond, leaving them with nothing. Talk about abandonment issues. Imagine having your whole house up and leave you. In all seriousness, though, in their desperation, the family spent the coming days scavenging the riverbank attempting to salvage any possessions. And while this was certainly a cruel twist of fate, living that close to a river is known to be a troublesome choice for homeowners to make. Even with elaborate flood control systems in place, rivers can still cause catastrophic flooding. So opting for a home with lovely riverside views comes with some inherent risks. But even without flooding, a river's water can over time be naturally destructive to the land. It's what's known as avulsion, the natural changing of a river's permanent path over the route of least resistance over time. I mean, just look how Peru's Ucayali River meandered from just 1984 to 2012. But sadly, the river-bitten home we saw a moment ago isn't the only time a house has been lost to the changes of a river. In 2017, a riverfront house in Warren, New Hampshire was also swept from its foundations and sent down the river. And as if things couldn't be much worse, any vague hopes of fishing the house back out were crushed after what happened next. Ouch. And that's why you don't mess with Mother Nature. She will quite literally fold your house in half like a sheet of wet paper. But bizarrely, by contrast, this house, which is literally in the middle of New York's St. Lawrence River, is still standing after 70 years. Known as Just Room Enough Island, this miniature island was bought by the Sizeland family during the 1950s, who built a house on it as they wanted a remote getaway. And somehow, having defied erosion and flooding, it still stands strong. While the water level of much of the St. Lawrence River is closely monitored and controlled by dams, there's always a chance that one day Mother Nature might just decide to sweep the picturesque little home away regardless. Something this house in Serbia knows all too well. The story of this bizarre little building begins in the summer of 1968. Brothers Malaysia and Milan Mendik and their pals would often swim in the Drina River in the town of Bajina Basta. Amid this river was a rock where the swimmers would take rest. However, under the scorching sun, it would become unbearable, so they hatched a plan. They'd construct a whole cabin on top of the rock known as the Drina River House. Unfortunately, as fall came around, rainfall and a higher water level washed their cabin away. It would be restored and then destroyed again. Restored, destroyed again, and so on. Until 2011, when it was restored for its 7th time and has been standing there strong for the last 11 years. Though we can only assume it's just a matter of time before it's knocked off its rock once again. So if you were planning on building a house on top of a rock in the middle of a river, I wouldn't if I were you. Alternatively, you could just do what I do and live in the river itself. Lava la vida loca. They say you should love thy neighbor, but what about when your neighbor is a humongous hothead? No, not Big Mean Sharon 3 doors down. I'm talking, of course, about Mauna Loa in Hawaii, aka the world's largest active volcano. Yep, sitting at the foot of this volcano is quite possibly the ultimate daredevil's Airbnb, Phoenix House. For some 700,000 years now, Mauna Loa has occasionally been spewing lava into the surrounding lands. Some of Mauna's heated outbursts have been pretty serious, like an eruption in 1950 that left neighboring villages entirely devastated. But despite knowing that, Will Beilharz, the founder of sustainable tourism company Artistry, still had the boldness to ask, what better place to build a house? And while it's not exactly like the house is surrounded by lava right now, it does sit upon the solidified remains of a previous lava flow. And its vicinity to the volcano certainly puts it in the striking range of one of Mauna Loa's mood swings. Until very recently, her last eruption was way back in 1984. But in November 2022, Mona proved she's still feisty when she erupted, spewing a lava flow that traveled 11 miles before stopping. Thankfully, this flow missed the Phoenix house by quite some way, and there were no recorded injuries at all from this eruption. Thanks to this more merciful eruption, the house is still listed on Airbnb as of early 2023. But that doesn't mean this tiny home will be safe forever, and remains at risk of lava flows and bursts of carbon dioxide from the spicy bowels of the earth. But let's be real, it's still a pretty darn cool spot to stay at, right? What better way to live out your supervillain fantasies than an Airbnb where there's a chance you could wake up in the morning to views of your own personal lava moat? Cliffhangers. We'd all love a room with an ocean view. And while many a Malibu resident enjoys their beach house, this next house takes ocean view living to the extreme. I present to you Vertiginous Cliff House. Designed in 2014 by Australian housing firm Modscape, this concept came about after many of their clients requested homes in extreme coastal locations. And extreme coastal location is certainly what they got. Fastening itself to the cliff face, this modular home accommodates panoramic ocean views. However, while in theory it's completely possible, it's only a concept at this point. And if it were to be built for real, architects say unconventional construction techniques would be required. Each floor, being its own prefabricated module, would need to be individually anchored into the cliff using specifically engineered steel pins. Though the ocean, the very appeal of this house, could in fact cause the house's demise. On average, rock cliffs recede at around 2 to 7 inches per year due to the erosion caused by the constant battering of the tide and wind. So it's possible that within a few decades, the lower part of the cliff could erode enough to create a structurally unsafe overhang waiting to collapse. Kinda similar to this fictional concept image taken from an advertising campaign in 2013. Of course, that campaign's design would only be possible if the rock was sturdy enough to support the weight of the house, and avoiding the overhang snapping like a graham cracker. Honestly, I wouldn't be comfortable risking it either way. Having said that, just imagine if it did fall into the sea. Now that's a room with an ocean view. Elsewhere, clung to a cliff in the real world, is the Shuangkongsi Hanging Temple, which, as the name says, is quite literally a temple which hangs from a cliff near Mount Heng in the Shanxi province of China. Built in the 8th century, the temple is actually dedicated to 3 religions: Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. But considering its time of construction and the fact it's held up all this time, you might consider it an architectural wonder. At 246 feet above ground level, the temple is accessed only by a series of precarious walkways. The main supportive structure of oak crossbeams are fitted into holes chiseled into the cliffs, but you'd think hundreds of years of erosion would have done a number on it, right? Well, thanks to the temple being located beneath a prominent summit, it's very well shielded from the elements. Not forgetting that being elevated over 200 feet means it's protected from floods. That said, in 2015, a spell of constant rainfall caused rockfall from the cliff, which resulted in the site being closed due to safety concerns. So all in all, despite its longevity, it seems cliffside life is probably still a risky place to be. If for no other reason than the one factor we surprisingly haven't mentioned yet. That being, of course, human clumsiness. Living chic on the peaks. With the hustle and bustle of modern-day living, going Elsa mode and escaping to a castle in the mountains might sound appealing, but it might also be kinda possible, albeit with a little less ice palace and talking snowmen. Though be warned, it can be pretty risky. One such mountainous abode designed back in 2014, the Bivacco Luca Pascaletti, is a cabin that sits at an altitude of 10,790 feet in the Italian Alps. It's the brainchild of Italian architects Roberto Dini and Stefano Garotto, and was created to encourage exploration of the remote location. But due to the dangers at these lofty heights, the building had to be prefabricated and lifted to the peaks via helicopter. And indeed, the weather conditions up in the Alps can be rather beastly. Temperatures tumbling below -4 degrees Fahrenheit and wind speeds gusting up to 124 miles per hour are to be expected, with the structure being seated on what its creators describe as temporary foundations. The sounds of these strong winds pelting against the little cabin don't exactly fill you with confidence, and the Alps' history of landslides doesn't help much either. According to the architects, this tin can house is equipped to hold up and all throughout all of that weather chaos, but I mean, look at it. Would you trust that with your life in a gale force blizzard? Not to mention the possibility of being faced with your own mortal departure after tripping over the rough ground of that jagged mountain peak it's built upon. Yeah, I think city life with a Starbucks on every block is more my style. Bed and breakfast, and sharks. From the Four Seasons to the Savoy, the point of a hotel is to provide comfort and relaxation. However, when a hotel holds the reputation of world's most dangerous, you can forget all about comfort and relaxation. During the 1960s, a Coast Guard station known as the Frying Pan Tower was built just 34 miles off the coast of North Carolina. While it was used to help ships navigate the Atlantic, the advent of GPS eventually made it redundant. By 2004, it was abandoned. Being positioned in a protected reef area meant tearing it down wasn't an option, so it was put up for auction, the lucky bidder being Mr. Richard Neal. And he had big ideas. Richard's ambition was to restore the dilapidated structure, but he needed funds to do this. So he repurposed the structure as a thrill seeker's hotel experience. And let me tell you, thrills certainly are to be sought in this place. With mean coastal winds and bitter temperatures, the Atlantic home of the Frying Pan Tower is in and of itself dangerous. What's more, the waters immediately surrounding the Frying Pan Tower are a popular hangout spot for sharks, meaning you're only one unfortunate slip away from a Jaws-type situation. And while sharks aren't all bad, the sand tiger sharks that call this area home are commonly ranked among the world's top 10 most aggressive shark species, with 35 unprovoked attacks on humans on record. So probably not the type you want to be panic splashing around with. Climate and creatures aside though, the structure itself is also a hazard. The incessant battering from storms and ocean spray has reportedly left the tower severely rusted and weak. As a result, this not-so-romantic getaway is under constant renovation. Now, of course, Richard and the team try to make the hotel as safe as possible, but considering you have to sign a waiver to visit, you'd have to be a braver individual than me to test your chances of survival at the world's most dangerous hotel. Help! The earth ate my house! Ah, Florida, the Sunshine State. With an annual average temperature of 71.5 degrees Fahrenheit, it's no wonder that it's earned such a name. And while it's usually sunny in Florida, there's a prowling darkness beneath this state. Sinkholes. Sinkholes that are capable of swallowing entire homes. It was February 28, 2013, and 37-year-old Jeffrey Bush was in bed in his home in Seffner. That was until around 11 p.m. when, without warning, a ginormous sinkhole ruptured the earth beneath his house, swallowing him and his entire room in one gulp. He was never seen again. Similarly, in 2015, 5 homes in a residential area north of Tampa were at the mercy of a 225 feet wide, 50 feet deep water-filled sinkhole. Thankfully, no one was injured in that latter incident. But the reality is, sinkholes are so prevalent in Florida that home insurance companies are even required to offer catastrophic ground cover collapse. In other words, sinkhole coverage. But what exactly causes sinkholes in the first place? Florida is primarily built on limestone, which dissolves relatively easily in rainwater, especially rainwater that becomes acidic after seeping through topsoil. When the limestone dissolves, it can gradually create an enormous network of underground cavities known as karst. Over time, these caves will collapse, often triggered by the lowering of groundwater levels, resulting in tragic sinkholes, such as the one that claimed Jeffrey Bush's life. The scariest part, however, is that they aren't exactly forecastable, meaning any innocent Floridian could be sat at home right now, perhaps watching this video, totally oblivious to the sinkhole that's about to have them for supper. So it looks like Florida might indeed be an unreasonably dangerous place to live, and not just because of the crazy locals. Top of the rock. Panoramic views of New York City might be what you initially think of when I say top of the rock. However, what I'm actually talking about is Kochki Pillar. Located in the village of Kochki in western Georgia, Kochki Pillar is perhaps one of the riskiest churches in the world and is reportedly home to Maxim Kavtaradze, a monk of the Orthodox Church. The mammoth pillar is formed of natural limestone and peaks at 130 feet. But why is there a church at the top? Well, between the 6th and 8th century, the church was built as a place for undisturbed Christian worship and spiritual reflection. You can definitely see how some peaceful solitude could be found up there, if you could calm your nerves, that is. Maxime, the elderly monk residing in the pillar-top church, has lived there for more than 20 years and only comes down twice a week to pray at ground level with his followers. Reportedly, he's not bothered by the dizzying heights at which he lives, as he worked as a crane operator before joining the church. Plus, he says he feels closer to God this way. I can see where he's coming from, after all. He's basically in the heavens up there. Even so, accessed only by an iron ladder, the 130-foot climb is not exactly senior citizen friendly, and there's also the risk of erosion to the pillar. As we've already discussed, limestone, which Kochki Pillar is made from, can erode relatively easy in rainwater, meaning it's possible one day the pillar will reach breaking point, bringing its solitary resident back to Earth the hard and fast way. Let's hope he's got a parachute close by. A blown abode. Ah, Pixar movies. They always have such a way of making the impossible seem completely possible. From a universe of monsters and toys that can talk to an entire house that can travel by balloon. But what if it were actually possible? You know, to set sail on a balloon house. Well, weirdly enough, it actually is. Though it wouldn't be quite as easy as Up's Carl Fredricksen makes it seem. Let's just say you'd need a lot of balloons. But how many? Well, first things first. The reason helium balloons float is that they weigh less and are less dense than the air they displace, which, thanks to the physics of buoyancy, causes them to be subjected to an upward force. This force is sufficient to overcome the downward force of gravity, so they float. To generate enough force to counteract the force of gravity on a house, however, isn't easy. In this hypothetical scenario, let's assume this house is a little one at around 100,000 pounds. A helium balloon experiences an upward buoyant force that can lift roughly 0.067 pounds. To figure out the amount of balloons needed, we just have to divide the weight of the house by the upward buoyant force acting on a single balloon. So if we crunch the numbers, carry the one, there we are. To begin lifting the house, you'd need almost 1.5 million balloons. It's one big party. But here's the crazy part. In 2011, National Geographic actually carried out the experiment, and lo and behold, got a house to fly. Well, sort of. You see, they built a small-scale, lightweight house, more akin to the gondola of a hot air balloon. They also used much larger balloons called weather balloons, each 8 feet tall, specifically designed to deal with high-altitude weather. With 300 of these, each filled with a whole tank of helium, the house set off on a 1-hour cruise across California's high desert with 2 people inside. Now, before you raid Walmart's party aisle for 1 million balloons, National Geographic's experiment took place in a very controlled and simplified circumstance. The reality of a fully fledged balloon house would likely be a lot more deadly. Between airplanes, buildings, bodies of water, a risk of balloons bursting, and a lack of any means of proper steering, it's pretty clear to see why this fun-seeming house situation wouldn't work out very well for us mortals outside the Pixar universe. So, is the balloon house from Up possible? Theoretically, kinda. Should anyone risk trying it? Absolutely not. Treehouse Tea House. In Chino, Nagano in Japan sits a tiny 29-square-foot treehouse, built for the purpose of sipping tea with a view while perched between 2 chestnut trees. Bequeathed with a name that literally translates to mean a tea house too high, Takasugi-an is a tea house designed by Japanese architect Terunobu Fujimori. Known for his eccentric design that often uses natural materials and subverts traditional techniques, Takasugi-an Treehouse is no exception. However, this teetering tea house could potentially be dangerous. In fact, in 2010, Time magazine actually named it as being one of the most precarious buildings in the whole world, which, considering that it's supported by only 2 twiggy trees, comes as no surprise. I mean, just consider how easy trees topple in stormy weather. And with Takasugi being located in Japan, this only makes things more risky. What with Japan being ranked as the 4th country in the world most affected by extreme weather events. Those weather events, of course, include earthquakes that could shake the tea house loose like a bucking bronco, so it could only be a matter of time before Takasugi spills the tea, so to speak. Similarly sketchy are the tree houses of the Korowai tribe in New Guinea, with these homes being made mostly from branches and towering up to 114 feet in the air. It seems even a hint of storm could destroy these homes. Though, considering the Korowai people were almost entirely isolated from the outside world until the 1970s, and still haven't made a huge amount of contact since then, the potential lethality of their tree houses isn't exactly well documented. But even with their reportedly excellent climbing skills, it's not hard to imagine that climb becoming very treacherous for elderly Korowai tribe members. I mean, I don't see any sign of the kind of machine my grandma needs to get up her house's stairs, do you? And that, I'm afraid, is all we have time for today. Let me know in the comments which house you thought seemed the most risky to stay at, and I'll catch you in the next one.